And I hope you're having an amazing day. So today I'm going to talk about interfaces, right? So in my last episode, I talked about abstract class. So today I will tell you why we need to use interfaces and what's the basic difference between abstract class and interfaces, right? Okay, so the first thing first, you need to register for an org if you haven't done so. I trust you guys have all done that. So I logged into my org, so let's go to developer console. So as usual, to go to developer console, you need to go to the scarecrow icon at the top right hand corner, and it will take you to the developer console. Okay, all right, so why do we need an interface, right, when we have an abstract class, right? So there is a key difference you need to understand. Apex is a object-oriented programming language, right? But like other object-oriented programming language like C# or Java, Apex do not support multiple inheritance. What that means is that you cannot inherit from more than one class at a time. Okay, so if you remember when I talked about inheritance, where I say public class extends another class, right? So you can't extend from a multiple classes, right? So when you have to do something like that, you need to make use of interfaces, right? Interfaces are handy in that case. So interfaces are like it's pretty. Interfaces do not have any body definition whatsoever, right? And interfaces is like an similar to abstract class. It's like an agreement, right? You are making with a class which implemented that, whatever class that's going to implement interface will implement every method. In other words, let's say you have an interface, say a rocket ship, right? So just say, think about an interface, right? Rocket ship. And so rocket ship functionality is going to fly, okay? So let's say if SpaceX, for instance, right, decides to implement that rocket ship, right, obviously it will form an agreement with the rocket ship, right, interface that, look, I will implement your fly method. That's exactly what it is, right? It's like an agreement or a contract they sign, if you understand from that perspective, right? So that's why the interface is like you code towards abstraction, right, rather than implementation. That's how the concept of interfaces are very handy because when we talk about design principles, you will understand concepts like dependency injection and other kind of stuff, which I'm not going to go on that today because it's going to get overwhelming for you if you have never studied about interfaces. So for now, interface is like an interface, right? So or in other words, or another example, right, I can tell you, right, you have a socket, right, in your house. Inside the house you have a socket on the wall, right, where you usually plug in. Okay, so let's say you travel to another country. Okay, so you travel to another country, so South Africa or India or United States, right? You know that the socket, the pins are different, right? So obviously you carry an interface, right? A kind of a converter, right? So you plug that converter and you use that charger. So basically you're not replacing the wall socket, right? When you travel to another country, you just plug in an interface and you use it, right? That's all it is. So that's how the interfaces comes in the picture, okay, in simple terms. So I will explain to you how it works, and so again, the concept of polymorphism is very important, right? So these are strong object-oriented programming concepts, and it's very important you understand it because interfaces are very handy, okay? So let's dive in, okay? So the first thing, let me create an interface for you. It's pretty much similar to the way you create a class. Okay, so you go to new, so go to Apex class, okay? Let's say we're gonna develop rocket ship, okay? Rocket ship interface, okay? So normally there's a naming convention, okay? So what I normally do, I just normally put I before, the name, okay? So I put I rocket ship just to, differentiate from it classes, right? Because sometimes I've seen people put C before, before the name just to say it's a class, but that's fine. That depending upon the standards you follow in a company, but normally this is what I do, because this is the standard we've been following across different platforms, because I've programmed in .NET, I've programmed in Delphi, so I'm programming a little bit of Java as well. So I tend to see people use I as a naming convention, I rocket ship, or I interface, because it's easy to distinguish, easy to identify. You have a class, you have an interface. When someone looks at the name, oh, okay, this is an interface, right? Okay, right. So let's start with the rocket ship. Okay. Now the thing is, as I said, right, interface like abstract class. The thing with abstract class, you can have a method in a class which have a body, right? So in abstract class, what I've demonstrated last time, right, I created an abstract class and an abstract method, but you can also have a non-abstract method in an abstract class, okay? I know that sounds a bit crazy, but it's complicated if you haven't worked with abstract class before. But just for now, just to make it very simple, interface do not have any body whatsoever for a method, okay? So that means I would say void, okay, void fly, okay? And that's it. And so let me save it. All right. Now, the mistake I've done, right, okay? Now, I know that you might be thinking, oh, okay, what this guy doing, right? Because he defined an interface, okay? But he made it similar like class, right? I understand that. I've done that on a purpose, okay? So you remember I talked about how to create an interface using class, right? So this looks pretty much similar for you, right? When you create a class, you have to create a class, and it will give an impression that you are creating a class. The only difference is instead of class, right, you replace it with interface, okay? That's all you have to do, right? So what I've done, right, so I did file, new, Apex class, and I create a class, right? So I created a class for me, and I tried to define a method, and it gives an error, okay? So the error, because in a class, right, you need to have a body to a method, right, in a normal class. But for an interface, you don't need to have a body, because it will not allow you to have a body to a method, right? So if you try to add a body, right, it will complain, okay? So let's see. Right, so it will not work. So, right, so that's how I'm gonna try with one method. You can add multiple methods if you wanted to try, right? You can say, let's say, make some noise, right? Okay. I know it's a crazy, make some noise, make some sound, whatever, okay? Right, this is another method, okay? So you can have as many methods you want, right? So now what we're gonna do, we are gonna have an agreement with, a company, right? Who manufacture rockets, okay? Let's say I'm gonna create a class, okay? So we'll say, say space rocket, okay? Space rocket, okay? Now, I want this class to have an contract with interface, okay? Because obviously, interface for the sake of interface is no good, right? Because it should do something, right? So the reason why we use interface is that because we code towards abstraction, okay? So now, in this case, we have a class, but we need to define we have to implement that interface, okay? So remember, in case of inheritance, right? Inheritance, we extend it, okay? Because we are inheriting something, okay? Whereas in case of interface, we are implementing it, okay? That's the difference between an abstract class and interface, right? You can't use a keyword implement when you're using an abstract class, okay? You have to use extend, because it works like inheritance concept, okay? But whereas in terms of interface, you use implement, okay? So we just say implements, okay? I rocket Okay, rocket shop. Okay, all right, it doesn't matter. Okay, a rocket shop which manufactures rocket. Okay, so that's right. Right, now you might wonder what happened, right? Okay, so far it's good. Okay, what have we done? But you remember that when a class implements interface, right, it forms an agreement. Okay, so it forms an agreement that, hey, I'm gonna implement your method, right? So that's an agreement I'm gonna form with your interface. That's exactly what class is telling the interface. But in this scenario, right, so the space rocket has not implemented iRocket shop methods, right, because hasn't fulfilled the contract yet. So what's required here? So we're going to do this one, okay, and we're going to say public. Let's copy it here, okay, and we need to specify access types, okay, so we're going to do this. Oh, come on. Okay, just a second. I know if you're new to interface, it will take some time for you guys to understand the concept, but stay with me. It's not that hard, you know, and it's a very important concept at the same time, okay? So, all right, so now everything looks okay, right? So now Space Rocket's telling to iRocket Shop, I'm gonna implement these two methods for you, okay? Right, so we can say, you know, system.debug, you know, I'm not putting any, you know, meaningful method of flying because I can't implement flying logic. Just for the sake of argument, and just putting system dot, you know, space rocket flying. Okay, so we can say sound. Okay, right. So let's save it. It's great. Now let's say I have another company, right? Let's say another company wants to implement rocket. Let's say, you know, Pete Rocket, you know, company, whatever rock company, you know, fictitious company. Okay, so wants to, you know, form an agreement with interface as well. So we're gonna do the same. Okay, so we're gonna exactly copy the same. Okay, and we're gonna do this here. Okay, we say Pete. Okay, right. So we're gonna do Pete Rocket. Okay, Pure Rocket. Okay. Now, the interesting thing is that, as I said, right, the main advantage of using interface, you're coding towards an abstraction, not towards implementation, right? So the calling user, right, should not be bothered with the underlying details of the code, right? So let me show you how to use the interface, right? Pay attention here. It's very important, okay? So there are two ways you can use it. One is, you know, pretty straightforward. You know, I can show you how to use it. So you can use the space rocket, something like that. SpaceX rocket s equals to new. Right? This one you know how to do this, right? So you must be saying, oh, okay, this is like a class, right? You have a class, you create an object, and you use the method through an object, okay? So you can say s.fly, which is fantastic, right? No worries. So it will say space rocket. I don't want it to say SpaceX because I don't want Elon Musk, you know, coming behind and say, oh, you know, privacy right, you use my company name. No, I'm not using this company name. I want to get into trouble. And he will say, oh, look at it. Even if you have used the SpaceX, should have used a better example. So yeah, I'm not going to get into that stuff. Okay, so as you can see, I've used this, you know, class and object, right? But this defeats the whole purpose. I mean, why bother doing interfaces first place, right? If I have to do something like this, right? It defeats the whole purpose, right? Because the whole idea of using interface is to code towards abstraction, because now we are coding towards the implementation, because we are exposing the underlying objects, right? So underlying class. So I don't want to do that. So, or if I wanted to use the Pete rocket, so I have to do something like Pete rocket P equals to new Pete rocket, right? And then P dot fly, which is saying Pete rocket flying. Okay, this is not what I wanted. Okay, because I don't care you use space rocket. I don't care you use Pete rocket, because as a user, right, I'm only concerned about with iRocket shop, right? That's all I'm interested in. Okay, I don't care if it's a space rocket or if it's a Pete rocket, right? For me, the iRocket shop should able to figure out stuff for itself. Okay, so what I meant by that, usually, okay, usually, let me create another class here. Okay, let's say main factory class. Okay, factory class. Oh, okay, and we're gonna say public static. Okay. You know what? Forget it, because I don't want to complicate it. So I'm not going to get into the design pattern. So I'll show you in a very simple way how to use it, okay? Because if I get into the design pattern, then it's going to get tricky. All right, okay. So what we're going to do, go back to here. So I'm going to do rock shop, okay? rock, okay? This is an interface, right? So what we're going to do, you can do something like iRock equals to new space rocket, okay? Right? So I say iRock dot fly, right? So when I run this, so it says rocket fly, right? Now you might wonder, okay, what's the difference anyways? Because we are doing space rocket before, now you just put that iRocket fancy stuff. The difference is here, I'm not using, object of space rocket here to access the fly method. Instead, I'm using interface, right? So usually what happened, right? This comes under a factory method where, I'm just going to pass a value to a method saying, look, I'm interested in the space rocket, okay? So all the interface will do, so it will pick it up and it does that behind the scene and give me this iRock.fly, okay? So for users only interested into line number 1 and line number 5, right? In real life scenario, okay? They're not interested in line number 3, okay? Because for a user in the sense, an application which consumes this code, okay? Or the place where you will be using this interface in simple terms, right? Obviously, user can't be human user, right? Because it has to be used in somewhere in your Apex code, right? So let's say you are using it somewhere in your Apex code, right? So most likely you'll be interested in the first and the line number 1 and line number 5. Rest of the thing should have been handled using a proper design pattern, okay? So that's how interfaces comes in the picture, okay? Now, so, and I can do something like this as well, okay? A new, let's do using a, okay. Okay, so let me show you. iRock.fly, okay? So this one will obviously print, Pete rocket flying, okay? So let me imitate a factory design pattern here, how it should work, okay? So that you will understand what I'm trying to say, okay? So let me comment this code, okay? Let me declare a Boolean variable, okay? A Boolean, okay? Come on. Boolean, okay? Pete, so space rock equals to true. Okay, so if space rock. I'm trying to imitate a factory pattern, so I will don't want to go into the detail, but I'll just give you a context where interface is very popular. So we're going to do iRock equals to new, what's the name of that? Space rocket. Okay. Else. Right. P rocket. Right. Okay. Now, in real life scenario, right? In real life, so you won't be actually using this. What's that called? This part of a code, right? Because you won't have to have an access to this code from line number 5 to line number 12, right? That will be handled by a separate class, okay? Because when you are consuming this interface, your point of interest should only be, line number 1 and line number 2, okay? And the line number 15, okay? iRock.fly, okay? For now, for a second, okay? For a second, imagine that you can't see the code from 5 to 12, okay? Imagine that, this part of the code is hidden from you, okay? So you can only see this, iRocket shop, which is an interface data type, and I declared a variable, okay? And I said space rock, okay? I wanted to get the behavior of a space rock, okay? So I set it to true. Rest, I don't care what's happened here. And all I'm saying, okay, interface.fly, right? Just give me that. And let's see what happens. And you will get, you see? Now, let me go back and say, look, I'm not interested in this. I'm not interested into repeat, okay? So let me execute this. And you can see rocket fly, okay? So what I'm doing here is I'm coding for abstraction, not towards implementation, okay? So I don't care about the underlying details. I'm not interested in that whatsoever. I'm only interested in, give me the interface and give me the method, okay? That's all I care, and this is the condition, okay? So I have declared an interface variable, and I passed the value to say, look, this is what I'm interested into, and interface dot method will give me whatever I wanted to achieve, okay? So that's how you code towards abstraction rather than implementation, and it's a very powerful concept, right? Because this is one of the important advantage of using object-oriented programming language. It's like you are not exposed to the complexity of underlying architecture, right? You use it like a black box, okay? So you say, okay, think about like a black box, right? You have a black box, where you can have a few buttons, right? So you press this button, something will show up. You press another button, something will happen, right? So it's exactly what interface is all about, right? So it makes you use the the classes and underlying implementation like a black box, right? So that you're not bothered with what's going on under the hood. That's all interface is all about in simple terms. Or you can think about the example I gave you earlier about the socket, right? Where you can plug in different interfaces, and you're not changing the wall socket, right? You're not pulling off the stuff from the wall when you go check into a hotel, let's say in Zimbabwe, or let's say in Johannesburg, or say in Stockholm, or wherever in Copenhagen or Denmark, wherever, right? So you're probably carry an extension interface, right, where you can use your iPhone charger or laptop charger, right, depending on the country you're traveling, traveling to, right? So that's how the concept of interface works, because you are not exposed to the underlying complexity, right? What's happening on that charger interface, right? You don't care how the charger works, how the switches are connected, how the electricity flows. You don't have to do anything about that, right? All you have to do, plug in the damn thing, and stuck in that charger or a laptop charger, whatever, right? And voila, you're good to go. So that's all the interface is all about. Okay. I hope you find this session interesting. I know that interfaces can be a bit wacky and a little bit complicated at the same time if you're new to object-oriented programming, but all I can suggest is that don't get overwhelmed, please. Read about interface when you get a chance. You can read about Java documentation; it's pretty much similar. You can read about Apex documentation, right? So, and probably come up with a scenario and do hands-on. One of the important thing in programming is you need to do hands-on, right? It's like you can't learn a language just by listening to someone else, speaking, right? For instance, like if I wanted to learn, say, for instance, Dutch, right, or say German, I can't learn just by listening and not practicing, right? I have to speak with someone, right, to practice it, right? If I pretend that, okay, I can learn German by not practicing whatsoever, it's not going to happen, right? I will probably end up in speaking like with strange, accents, when German people will say, what the heck is talking about, right? So it's the same concept with programming. You need to practice, you need to understand a concept, and you need to try. Muscle memory is very important, right? So yeah, that's what I wanted to cover today. So that being said, greetings and adios. Take care.